All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We were waiting for our video to be all set, and it looks like that has happened. So we'll start with introductions. We'll start here in Schenectady. As you all know, my name is Clarissa Rodriguez, Chair of the Board.
Michelle Cummings, Facilitator.
Joe Cannabis, New York State AFL-CIO.
Lev Ginsburg, the Business Council of New York State.
Rebecca Woods, Workers' Comp.
David Woodheim, Workers' Comp.
Stephanie DeFali, Workers' Comp.
And Petrozello, Amtrust.
Okay. And in White Plains.
Hi, Winston Quall, Mount Sinai.
Rick Weinstein, Orthopedic Society.
Great, thank you for being
Natasha Hamill, Evangelista, Workers' Comp Board.
Okay, great. And in Manhattan.
Workers Bar Association.
Start again.
William Turley, Injured Workers Bar Association.
Karen Anderson, New York State Insurance Fund.
Mindy Roller, New York City Law Department.
Dr. Robert Goldberg, the Medical Society of the State of New York.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. And in Rochester.
Brian Trick, Wegmans Food Markets.
Okay. Hi, Brian. Thanks for being here. All right, we'll go ahead and get started.
All right, we're at the second to last meeting. Here's a copy of the schedule that we've gone through. The purpose of the meeting today is to review some of the outstanding issues that we have and which are indicated on the agenda. Hopefully we can wrap those up in an hour. And then, spend the bulk of the time reviewing the draft report, which I believe all of you have received and hopefully have the opportunity to look at. So without further ado, I think we might as well just jump right in and start the first topic, which I would defer to David, which is the mandatory continuing education.
Okay, so in the context of this, we talked about the expanded provider law going into effect in January and how the applications were going to be electronic through a portal, and then we had some mandatory training elements in that. So in that reg, it talks about, in general, the fact that training is required in order to apply for an authorization as a provider. You're going to have to indicate that you've taken that mandatory training, which we can check. And there's also a provision that talks about the training upon your, if there is any mandatory training set forth, upon your renewal of authorization within 30 days of licensure being renewed through the state education department. There's nothing in the current reg that talks about continuing medical education, or how it would be structured, but it is housed in that regulation. But with that as the background, obviously it's still up to the committee to determine if any particular recommendations about CME training, how it would be done, who would do it, would come to fruition. But other than that, it's just something that's left within the purview of the chair.
I'm not. Thank you. And I think my recollection from last month was that we were split on whether or not that would be mandatory. I think we all agreed that some CMEs were useful, some continuing ed was useful.
No, I think that was the only thing, it's Rick Weinstein, I think that was the only thing we actually all agreed on.
Right.
That it would be mandatory every 2 years, and it would be free, and it would provide CME credits as well.
No, not unanimous, because I felt that it should be paid for, that the physician attending should be paid for their time, that it's not mandatory, that there are too many mandatory things that are unfunded mandates. So with all due respect, I'm Dr. Weinstein, not all of us felt that way. But there is another caveat that I would like to add, that if we're talking about continuing medical education, we have to identify the entity that would be accrediting, that would be approving the credits. We have the ACCME, the Accreditation Council on Medical Education, which is under the auspices of the American Medical Association, and also the AOA. So if we go ahead with it, I would recommend that those be the two organizations that could apply the credits to the candidates seeking credit for it.
Just to clarify, it was a unanimous vote, but for your abstention.
Right. The current CME credits that are granted for the workers' comp about 2 or 3 years ago, who's doing the accrediting for that? Does anyone know?
believe we took those through MISNY, they helped us arrange for those.
And Disney is an ACCME.
Yeah, I think that has worked very well for most of the doctors who I've spoken with, and I would recommend doing it the same way.
And I would like to investigate adding the AOA to that, because we require all physicians, and there are many physicians that are DOs that are not members of MISNY.
So is it the committee?
So can I just
the
back up the-
responsibility of the committee to decide who, or is it the responsibility of the committee just to decide?
It's a recommendation,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right, so to Lev's point, I did think that the last meeting we had consensus to require the two hours of training. And we were supposed to come back with proposed language, which is what David is, what's been handed out today. I think with respect to who's doing the accreditation, to actually put that into the laws or the regulations seems problematic. I think it's, we understand that you want us to use a broader or look at multiple organizations, but I think, we have procurement issues, companies come and go. Like, I just think that, as long as we're saying it's with an accredited organization so that you get the credits, I think that's probably as far as we recommend the language go.
You could
for
describe
this
the requirements of the agency that produce it.
So can we go back and revisit? I guess the question is to you, Dr. Goldberg, if we're going to pull this off the table and say we don't have consensus, or if we're going to move forward and look at the language that David has recommended.
Well, since the clarification was that it was consensus and not unanimous, there's nothing, that's a correct statement, and I'm fine with it. And thank you for reminding me about the way I addressed that vote. And with respect to the CME, if we say an accrediting agency acceptable to the Department of Education for CME, then we wash our hands of it and let them deal with it.
I just want to clarify one thing there about, we do not have distributed recommended language. What I was saying is, we have a regulatory framework to already do it, so we could do it administratively upon the recommendation of the committee without having to change the regulation, because we already have the framework to do it. Of course, we could change the regulation, but it's not necessary.
Thanks.
Yeah, so you're digging for it.
Yeah, my apologies.
Okay. So it seems like everyone is on board with that, with the exceptions already noted. Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna move the continuing education forward as a recommendation to the committee.
And I guess in the report, the way that we'll outline it is just saying that this is something we can do administratively. I mean, do we have to provide, and David, I'm looking at you, do we have to provide anything more than that in the report?
I don't think it's necessary to. Again, we can if the committee wants to.
Yeah, but we don't, if it's not necessary, we can just say we're gonna do this
So
without a regulatory change.
is the committee okay with that? Just moving forward without mentioning it in the report, or do you want specific language in the report?
So my concern that I raised at the outset of the discussion on this topic is that the board do it and not involve another vendor. If it's a recommendation of the group, I think that we should use it in writing and include it in the report, no?
I
And if there's
defer to
pushback.
all of you.
I think that makes sense, but again, up to the committee, but I think that makes sense. I think the board would do it.
I'm concerned that, if there's no writing, we don't know what it is, and I don't want to be hamstrung later on by being accused of supporting something that, I may not have fully understood, just by saying, well, let them do it.
So part 5 of the report currently does summarize what the committee recommendation was, or what we thought it was as of a month ago. And that was the board should provide directly or through a vendor or entity continuing education and training on key topics within a specialty and is related directly to workers' comp. Should provide those training to all providers at no cost to providers, and providers authorized to perform IME should be required to take those trainings every 2 years.
request that on the first bullet, that the text between the two comments be removed, or through a vendor or entity.
And I also recommend we take out the word unanimous and leave it at consent. But I have a question. We've been talking about continuing medical education, so that would pertain to the physician component. But according to what we're looking at, there are podiatrists that are capable of doing it, and also psychologists and chiropractors. And certainly they're not medical providers. Do we need to put any provision in this to address the education that will be made available to them?
Yeah, I think it should indicate the continuing education credits as required, that are pertinent to that particular healthcare provider, whether it's nurse practitioners, social workers,
Within their scope of practice.
existing.
Nurse practitioners are not included in this, and I would use the term physician and other healthcare providers. Thank you.
That's the
Right,
wording
they're not
of what's
included in the
says.
IME part of it. I'm just saying, in order to renew their authorizations, they do need to get the training, so it probably makes sense to have all the training delivered in the same method, although I agree, it's not part of what this committee is doing. I agree.
Can I just ask, then there will be separate sorts of training for various types of practitioners?
It may end up being the same training depending on the topic,
Okay, I was just
but
curious.
the accreditation for it is different.
So I'm curious too, if they're not included under the provisions for the IME, why address them at all then? Perhaps
That's what I'm saying. We don't
crazy.
need to address them. I'm saying I had mentioned them because the regulation requires all healthcare providers who are getting renewed on their authorizations to take any mandated training. So I'm just mentioning it as a reference point. I'm not saying we're going to address it here.
So since they're not included, these would not be mandated for them, so they would be outside of this.
Through this committee, that's correct. Right. Through this
Thank you.
program. Right.
Thank you.
The only point we should probably add is the point of the accreditation by state ed. That's maybe like an additional bullet, just so we can note that we agreed on that.
Joe, when you ask that the words "or through a vendor or entity" be removed, is it your intent that board personnel provide the training? Is that what you mean?
We're already
Well,
doing that now, and sometimes it's
We
expanded,
have to,
but-
we have to go through a host to get the certification. We don't possess the ability to do it with medical providers presently. We prepare the training materials, but we have to file it with,
So,
yeah. So I guess we're gonna be using a consultant or a vendor of some sort to actually get the credits. Right, I mean, we don't have the capability of issuing CME credits ourselves.
you can seek like approval. I don't know
It works
how
for
CLE
CLE,
works. So CLE,
but
yeah,
not for
because
It doesn't
we-
for CME.
We would not be able to
Yeah.
get that. We would not be able to get that continuing authorization to be accredited to offer continuing education credits.
Well, is it like, so CLE, you can get continuing authorization, then you can also do like one-off applications, so.
Correct.
Is it similar for CME where you can do one-by-one applications?
For
but
us,
not-
we would be able to do one-by-one applications, yes.
Okay.
So in light
So
of that.
what,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you're saying that the materials are created by the board and certified, for lack of a better word, by the board as being what we want to train on.
What a large portion of my frustration with the workers' comp system is the number of vendors, the number of businesses involved that make a handsome living on the system, right? I understand that you can't, ideally, you have the worker and the employer, and that's it, right? But you need doctors, and you need lawyers, right? And then you go down the list and you need to involve more and more people in the system. I don't want to create another opportunity for a vendor to make money off the system, and that's my concern.
think that would be different. You wouldn't be creating a cottage industry, if you, which I think is what you're alluding to, because we would be creating all the materials, so there wouldn't be much incentive there, there wouldn't be much, financial incentive.
You would
Excuse
need a
me?
vendor to deliver the materials online, right? Are you able to administer it online? The board's not able to do that, right?
Yeah, we do them online currently, yeah.
The vendor to, you do those directly online.
Yeah, I mean, we do them online, like via webinars, but I
But
think
once you
what you're.
post them online, I don't know that we have the ability to offer the CME online, do a CME video. And, again, I'm not intimately familiar with all of the hoops we jump through to get these done. I mean, it's not a quick and easy process to get them certified to be CME credits. Elaine and her folks have worked with the Medical Society's accreditation team to get these set up so people could have the credits. I just want to make sure that everyone understands, like, we're not in the issuing business. We haven't been. I don't know what's entailed to put us into that business. It's different, as David, than the CLE side of the world. So if we're doing 2 hours a year, I understand your concern, Joe, but I don't know that it makes sense for us to go and get, all of the authorizations done for 2 hours a
So
year.
can we keep it like this as a recommendation of the committee, and then if the board can't do it, I mean, there's nothing in the statute that says that the board has to abide by the recommendations of the committee, right? Or the legislature has to abide by the recommendations of the committee. If there's no pushback here, if we can get this done unanimously, I would ask that it just be done as a recommendation of the committee, that it be done by the board directly, and if the board can't do it or won't do it, that's not for necessarily the committee to enforce or,
So just read me back the language you're recommending there.
So just delete the language between the two comments. The Workers' Compensation Board should provide directly for continuing education and training.
Excuse me, I actually understand Joe, I agree with Joe's concern. I think oftentimes we don't really consider or realize the downhill effects and how there's another actor in the system because of some legislation or regulation. However, I think in this instance, perhaps it's, sort of being overly cautious, because I think, as Mary Beth pointed out, the likelihood of somebody going into this in a big way simply to make, there's no real possibility of this becoming essentially what you said earlier, Clarissa, a cottage industry on this level. So why don't we just, I think the language, if you take out the word, the Workers' Compensation Board, and then what was the next word right after that, or other, just take out the other, let the board do it in the best way that it sees fit. I think that might work.
Which we could accomplish, we could have the word directly.
Yeah.
It provides
Directly,
for-
take out the word
Take out
directly.
And then what you want to do between the,
the most economically feasible.
that way, your point is well taken, and it still gives you a little bit of wiggle room if they can't do it independently.
I mean, I get it.
But they do.
I'm okay with it. They don't. There's no binding effect.
Understood, but this covers what you're talking about. If you take out directly or through a vendor or entity, your point is well taken and acknowledged. And it doesn't in any way tie anybody's hands. And I know you're right, hands aren't tied in any way, but I think it's a,
I think
just,
it's in where we only have potentially one recommendation, we like to be able to comply with that recommendation. That term directly is in there, we're already out of compliance.
That's true, let's set ourselves up there. Okay, so the language would be, should provide for continuing education and training. All right, everyone agrees? Okay.
Okay, all right. So let's move on to, everyone's good with that, right? Okay. Same day, same manner. David?
So you have some recommended language before you that would be a revision to 137(1)A, and I just want to walk through it because the current statutory provision really calls in describing same day, same manner, it talks about service upon everyone who needs to get a copy of the report, which includes the submission to the board. So in the recommended language, we've broken into 3 parts. The first part, where we've deleted through a couple of clauses, is the one that, where the report goes to the parties and the doctors who need to get it. It's still same day, same manner, which can be electronic to everybody, including the claimant, if desired. The second part is the affirmative statement that the claimant always gets a mailed copy of the report on the same day as any other service. And the third part specifically deals with the manner of submission to the board, which is that it shall be submitted in the format and manner prescribed by the chair, which is going to be the web upload. So that's how it's broken down. So it enables us to have that flexibility for the web upload. Everybody can be served in the same manner by the practitioner or the IME entity. And if that's electronic, the claimant could also get it electronically if desired, but the claimant will always get that mailed copy. So that's how it's structured. And Stephanie, I think you had some data.
Yep, and when we discussed this last, I think, Joe, you had requested a cost-benefit analysis of, what this would save or cost. So based on all the IME 4s that the board currently receives on an annual basis, the cost for scanning those is $350,000 a year. As David mentioned, the prescribed manner would be the web upload. The board is moving towards paperless, so adding in the functionality that we discussed last time as a possibility to mail to the claimants was really inconsistent with where we're headed. So we didn't price up what that would cost for the board to mail out the IME 4 reports to the claimants. That would remain the responsibility of the IME entities or the provider today.
Can we tighten up this upon request? I understand that you need to open up the hole so that if the injured worker doesn't provide an email address, say, you're not going to be prevented from serving anybody else through the web app or by email. So I think that there has to be something a little bit more affirmative there than upon request.
Okay.
Whether it's done through statute or maybe even regulation, I think that we have to make it clear that once the injured worker indicates that they want it via the same method as everybody else, then the obligation exists.
So are you saying, just to clarify, Joe, so this assumes you're gonna continue to get a hard copy no matter what?
Yes.
So are you saying that you want them to have the option to shut that off and just get it electronically, or leave that always paper,
I
plus?
think that they should always get a piece of paper from either the entity or the provider.
Okay,
The upon requ- so I made an assumption that the upon request language opens it up for the injured worker to get it by mail while everybody else gets it through by email or through the web upload. Is that a correct
Yes.
assumption?
This would be that they could get it both ways if they want to. So
I'm
They
talking
can
about
get the
just
electronic
the
upon request?
technical, the technical purpose of the upon request language.
Right.
It would be so that the claimant could get it the same way as all the other parties.
And it's assuming that the other parties are getting it by web upload.
Or email.
No.
Or email, okay.
By email.
So I would just like to make this a little bit stronger so that there's an obligation. It's not simply upon request. Upon request to me leaves, it's a little bit amorphous, right? What constitutes a request? I think that if there's an email address on file, they should get it that way, period. You know, I don't know that that totally comports with upon request.
So do you want the claimant to be able to get it both ways, or to be able to just get electronic if they clearly
No, I
indicate,
don't-
or definitely never be able to get it electronically?
No, I want them I want them to get it electronically if they provide the email address.
And not in paper.
No, I want them to get it.
Oh,
That-
you
well,
want-
that's what I'm
right,
saying.
right.
No, no,
So,
Right,
no,
so-
to me,
so
that's
the
the,
second
That's
that's
the
the
way it's
last
written,
sentence.
that is the way
Right.
it's written. So the way to do that would be to say, you know, we could reference a form, a chair promulgated form, you know, providing an email address or something like that, so that it could be something that the claimant could fill out as part of the IME process, that this is how they're going to want their report to be served.
So does the board communicate with injured workers by email now?
If they sign up to like Gov Delivery or something, that's.
It's very limited.
Yeah, very, I
Not-
mean,
not
not
claims
on
information.
not on much.
So, in the claim system, right, is there, you know, I would imagine that there are fields for, you know, name, address, telephone number, things like that. Is there a field for email address?
For the injured worker, I don't.
Not
I don't
today,
think
we wouldn't
there's-
use it.
I don't think
I don't
we
think
have
there's
the
one that I
capability
can
to
dig
see.
into.
We don't have it on the C3, so I would say no.
So we would have to make a form specifically for this, for the delivery.
Excuse me, can I just say, I actually think, why not, I think we've never discussed it, but I think it would be a great idea to include the email address on the C3 form, just modify the form. That's one thing. And then, I'm not so sure that this language actually is very clear on a few things. One, the initial clause says, copy of each report of IME shall be submitted on the same day in the same manner to the insurance carrier, the claimant's physician, other attending practitioner, claimant's representative. First of all, shouldn't it say, but it doesn't say how until you get to the third sentence, which is a copy of the report of IME shall be submitted to the board in the format and manner prescribed by the chair. I think it's frankly
But
unclear.
it doesn't say how today either.
Right, but I think our purpose is to say that it shall be submitted, that essentially, one way or the other, if we want it uploaded into the ECF or whatever the new claim system will be, and that will suffice as, wasn't the idea to make that suffice as notice to all parties, same day, same manner?
That's what I understood too. Thank you, Mindy.
Well, I think that's the idea I raised at the last meeting, but what I'm hearing is that the board doesn't want to take on responsibility for mailing a document to all parties of interest.
This could be really
I'm
costly.
not so sure that we need to mail anything at all. And in fact, I would suggest, and I think it would make so much more sense, that if you included the claimant's email address, I know everybody was, or certain, there were people who were staunchly in favor of mailing the claimant this form, but really, I think if it were emailed to everybody, unless the claimant particularly wanted a hard copy, I think if we're trying to recommend something that would be easier on the system and frankly easier on, claimants, the fact that they perhaps didn't, receive the copy in the mail. A lot of people do have problems with their mail. I think it would just make the whole system a lot smoother and make a lot more sense, but that's my suggestion.
So the recommendation doesn't specify what the manner is at the beginning, just like today's law doesn't specify what the manner is. So it
All right,
allows
so I'm
that,
suggesting that we should.
it allows that service electronically and the upload to the board. One of the things you suggested a minute ago was that the upload to the board would constitute service on parties. That's not something that I had heard previously, but I mean, that's certainly something the committee could discuss. You could have a system whereby it's uploaded and you have notification but not service, and hard copy mailing to the claimant. But that was not my understanding coming out of the last
Mr.
meeting.
Cleary, you'd be able to print it off of this website, right?
Sure, you'd be able to print it, but it would be uploading with notice, but not service. And
With-
hard copy service on the claimant.
With notice by whom?
And we'd have to talk about the method of what that electronic notice.
No, it would be directly from the IME vendor, I would assume, no?
Well, it's not always a vendor, and the way I'm reading this, a copy of each report of independent medical examination should be submitted to the board in a format and manner prescribed by the chair. That covers both the paper and electronic. And then it should then say, and then distributed according to the direction of the chair, so that when it is electronic, it will then be done electronically. Because this is difficult. I envision an email being pushed to the individual treating physician and others involved in care, rather than how would somebody know to go up and look up every one of their patients. So I'd like to see something that goes directly out. And just by changing the words or the order of these sentences, I think you have it. And yes, leave the hard copy to the claimant and allow them to opt in.
I'm thinking that if we said the claimant shall also be mailed a copy, that gives the claimant always getting that hard copy that Joe is concerned about. And and if we take out upon request, if the claimant's email is there, he or she gets it by email, and if it's not there, they're getting the hard copy.
That's easy enough to do.
Yeah,
I
so
would
get rid
only
of the-
add that the claimant should have the option of opting out of getting it a hard copy at least, because really, if they don't want it, why do we have to make sure they're getting something they may not need?
And in order to address Mindy's on the C3, where we have the email address, we can have a yes, no. Do you prefer electronic, hard copy, or both? And then by having the claimant designated, it's done.
Well, I mean, I think there's questions about whether that's outside the scope of this committee, but also, we don't always get C3s. So I just throwing that out.
Well, without it,
You mail it.
right, without it, you mail it.
Why don't you put the question on the questionnaire?
Can we take a stab at editing this in real time?
I like that idea.
So, like taking this language and maybe making some of the edits that were suggested so that everyone could sort of see it and see.
I mean, you
if
can
it
take
gets-
out, just my opinion, you can take out the upon request from the drafted language. That doesn't prohibit the claimant from getting an electronic copy. But if you take out the requirement of the hard copy mailing, I don't know if that provides an opportunity for consensus.
No, we would leave that.
If you took out just, I don't want to start a huge fight on this, but if we just took out the same manner, like the points in which you could serve in the same day, right? So if it's just sent in the same day, with a hard copy going to the injured worker, or upon request can convert to electronic, or both, is that really, that's kind of what we're trying to get to. I think it's the same manner that's hanging this all up right now. Right, we just want to make sure everybody gets told day one that it's there and it's available with a hard copy to the injured worker. Because, my concern is if we're putting this into statute, like, we're moving into a whole new re-engineering phase, we'd like to preserve the flexibility for our system to be able to do a lot of the work for us. And if it's just a matter of making sure everybody gets noticed the same day that the information is ready and available, it's in our case folder, is that the goal? I mean, does same manner really matter for every other party except that injured worker at this point?
I don't think so. I think if it goes to everybody either electronically or in the paper, or by paper, and it's the board at the same time, if somebody's really looking for it, whether it be an attorney, a carrier, or even a claimant who has access to e-case, they can go in when they know they're really looking that hard. They're going to look every day for it. I'm thinking particularly a claimant who's looking for authorization or something.
So if we just take out the same manner,
Yeah.
and then upon request, so
Right, so delete
just take
those.
out the upon request sentence, and just say claimant shall be mailed a copy of the report on the same day.
You take
Does
out
that,
the and.
does that tighten up your upon request?
I think that the claimant should have the opportunity to not get a paper copy. I don't
Well, we
think
can
that
add
has to.
that. We can add
Right,
that
so
to
we can
that
go to the next
sentence.
sentence,
Yeah, the
shall
next
be mailed
sentence.
a hard copy unless,
But has the option for paper,
Right.
has the option to waive paper or opt out of paper.
that's fine.
So, why not?
But then how does this address the fact that once it's uploaded, that the physician or IME entity doesn't have to then distribute it out? And it's not clear to me that if the board has it uploaded, do they have the capability of sending an email to the interested parties that it's available?
I
So
believe
once
it's
we
the
get it,
ID
can we
companies
send notice?
that.
Well, that's, I mean, I don't,
So that's,
that's not what the board, the board doesn't have a service role that way, and it would be the responsibility of whoever's promulgating the report, whether it's the practitioner or the entity, particularly to serve it on the physicians.
Did everyone get that?
Well, then that won't work
I
because the
didn't think-
physician won't have the email address or even know who all the other interested parties are. So how does that really work?
Right,
Yeah, last
I
month we were
didn't think
working on
that
the
was the
opposite
idea.
assumption.
Yeah. but-
Last month, we were working on the assumption that the board was going to disseminate, including memos. And then it worked. And now we're being told that the board can't do that or won't do that, and it won't work. Am I right?
What
Well,
about
I think we want to, so I'm not sure that we're saying we absolutely can't do it. I think what we're saying is we've never been in the middle of like sending it all out before. So if the ask to the board is, that it gets uploaded and it's available and the emails go out to parties of emails and the hard copy goes in your worker, I think we could build it, but we've never had to be responsible for all the mailings and things in the past. It's always been the IME entities to do it.
Right.
So it's a shift of responsibility.
I mean, there could be a way of developing, like what we have with with EDI on the Freus and the Shreis, that they are filed electronically with the board, and then what the board does, it creates within one business day a servable document, and it's the carrier's obligation to go in and then serve that document on the claimant, for example. So,
I'm sorry, continue.
no, that's it, I'm just saying, so, I mean, you could have it uploaded to the board, and then the entity can go and serve the copy or distribute the copy, so.
well, if we did that, we would have to remove both same day and same manner. Because if the board created a servable document available the next day.
Yeah, and that's how we handled it with electronic filing, we said within one business day. So,
It's the IME submission, it's in the same.
I think that I think maybe I'm getting a little bit lost, but I think that the problem with same day, same manner is that it's very difficult to accomplish it, and there's this very tight timeline, and the minute you miss, this was the whole discussion we had, the minute you miss one doctor, you blow the whole report pretty much. So my impression was, and I think that once it's in the board's file, that was the original discussion, was it's in the board's file. Why can't the board then just push an email saying it's been received to whoever is on notice, and then that's it. That's considered same day, same manner to everybody except the claimant, who either gets a hard copy or not.
And there's another advantage. By eliminating the requirement to go through a vendor, a physician in private practice can just upload it, which would then allow more doctors into the system, because it'll then be easy. One of the problems for expanding the pool of physicians doing IMEs is what do they do with the item when it's finished? To tell an individual doctor in his office that he has to comply with submit it on the same day in the same manner to the insurance carrier, the attending physician, or other attending practitioner, he has no way to know who those individuals are. This takes care of that. You upload it, and then the board distributes it.
Or even just advises that it's been uploaded. And isn't that really the system that's going to be used in terms of the medical portal or something?
I think I recall that, we had discussed that. Is there a way that we could do like just a general notification that something has been filed?
well, it would need to be served on the physicians,
Why?
because that's the way that they can review the report.
No, if
They
it
need,
goes
they
to the
need to have
board,
the report in order to review it. They can't go into CIS and review it. in case.
Right.
The new system would be able to do that.
Right.
Right. So the new system would be able to get the report in, recognize it, and then send out an email to the parties on notice, that a new report is available for them in a hard copy to the interim worker.
But the new
Right.
system won't be available for at least a year.
So you put the effective date out.
So rather than put the effective date out, why don't we just put together a couple of sentences, like general principles to be considered once this new system is available, instead of statutory language.
We have to change the statutory language to take out the same
No.
name.
We don't have to make specific statutory, we don't have to
Oh, I see your
provide
point. I see.
language with the recommendation.
The conceptually,
Conceptually, this is a technology that's gonna be available in a year or two, and this is what you might wanna consider once the technology is available.
And I just have a kind of an intro question to see if there's a comfort level in the interim to leave the statute exactly the way it is, except with respect to board submission to the board. Because that doesn't affect how anybody else gets served, but could we, in effect, exempt out the submission to the board, thereby allowing a carrier, an IME entity rather, to, or a carrier, to upload it to the board? Because right now, that's one of the obstacles that we have with things being available prior to hearing. And if you want to talk about that, Matthew.
yeah, and the
So,
standalone.
It doesn't sound unreasonable to me, just from a logistical standpoint, but I wouldn't be comfortable, because I really haven't considered it, I wouldn't be comfortable committing today.
Yeah, the issue there is that the scanning process has delays of varying length. So, an IME report, very often, and in some circumstances it's required, but very often judges require that an IME report be viewable within 3 days of the hearing, 3 days before the hearing. And there are instances where an IME report could be sent to the board a week before the hearing, but not appear in the board's electronic case file until after the hearing, which is problematic, because it potentially wastes a hearing. It could also potentially lead to an appeal as a result of an IME report being precluded when it was already in Binghamton somewhere waiting to be scanned.
And to back up on that too, we have an instant upload for documents necessary for hearing. We have prohibited the filing of a copy, in effect, of the IME4 report, even though it would assist the judge in preparing for the hearing, on the grounds that we don't want to confuse anybody by thinking that would, be a violation of the IME rules, or, prejudice anybody's rights. So it presents real world, on the ground problems for judges and practitioners in cases. But, so, I mean, we could draft something and send it around pretty quickly if you wanted to see what it looked like and consider it, or we could just, put something in the general principles, either way.
I like
Just
that.
your take on it.
I like the distribution part, but I would like to follow up Joe's comment, which is very important. The Medical Society of the State of New York worked very, very hard to include the board in our distribution. All too often, insurance carriers will claim that they never received medical documentation or invoices and other pertinent documents that are required for a patient to, an injured worker, to receive benefits to which they're entitled. By including the board in that distribution, the efficiency and responsiveness to the other parties improved. So I like having that in here, because otherwise this will be a one-off and then it might fall apart in other areas. So that I want everyone to be aware of one of the reasons why the board is included.
I just want to say, so I think this, if I'm hearing this correctly, the thing would be to take out the same manner for the board, for the purposes of sending this to the board, it could be uploaded, maintaining everything else in terms of the same manner, and then a recommendation sort of a future vision kind of recommendation. Is that what we're thinking of?
That's what I was saying. Joe had said that he hadn't had an opportunity to consider the, what I'll call the board exemption idea. But like I said, we could certainly send that around, but everything else I think was what we were saying, yes. Would that be something I could send around, Joe, that
You can do
folks?
whatever you
No,
like.
no, I'm just saying, I don't know what you
Will
mean.
will you consider it?
Well, given the time is of the
Yes,
essence,
yes,
I'm
yes,
just
yes.
saying.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything that would prevent us from taking a look at it and voting either way, you know, between meetings, right?
Right.
There's no
Okay.
prohibition there.
Right.
Okay. All right, so David, you'll distribute language for consideration?
And in that language, I guess we're going to also add these edits, right, to section 137.
I think the vote on this particular suggestion would be to have that just because it's before BIS comes in, would the committee consider recommending allowing upload to the board as opposed to having the board included as it is now in the same day sitting?
Yeah.
So
No,
we
I
would just be
know, but
limited to the one.
I guess what I'm saying is, would it live here within this?
It would live in
subsection of the
137
statute? That's what I
1A.
mean, yeah.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
then together with the two edits that we did agree to, we would add that. Okay.
What are they?
Well, no, I think,
No.
no, I think
I
this
think
would be
we're
the
scrapping
only edit.
that.
Oh, we're
is what I'm
scrapping
saying.
these
Yeah,
edits
we're
of the
scrapping
same
the
manner.
ones that were in red. And in lieu of those, David's gonna send new language, which addresses the consensus that we.
Okay, so I'm glad I asked, because I think that we had just agreed previously, and Mindy said
No,
that we
Yeah.
would get rid of same manner.
Right, so that's what, for the board, as an, if you split it into kind of an interim pre-VIS possibility,
Yeah.
and then longer term as we head towards VIS, a set of possible recommendations
Mhm.
about that are based on guiding principles that we've discussed.
Well, the last sentence of your proposed language goes hand in hand with the words "the board" being taken out of the current language, right? Because that last sentence says a copy of the report shall be submitted to the board
Right.
in the format and manner prescribed by the chair.
Right, and that's pretty much it. Is delete the board from the first part and keep the very last sentence, or something close to that.
Okay, so not to be dense, but what I'm asking about is what we had just said about the sentence right before that, in the same manner. Are we keeping or are we getting rid of that?
I think we keep,
Okay,
We're keeping.
keeping it.
just take
Obviously,
the board out.
Okay, does everyone
So-
get that? Because I think Mindy was under the impression that I was under, is that we are gonna get rid of it. And I understand what we're saying about the board caveat.
No,
So if you were to
Wait, I
just
think-
strike the first underlined sentence there and read it the
Right,
way it's drafted.
take, and, yeah.
Take out the hard copy
Leave,
sentence.
leave the statute as is currently the same. Put brackets around the words "the board" at the beginning and add the last sentence. That's pretty much what's going to be central.
but wait a second.
Exactly, that's what I'm asking. I don't think we were all on the
And
same.
are you also gonna take out upon request?
I'm not saying people have agreed to this.
Yes.
Right, this is what.
But
Yeah,
I
but
think
upon
we
request
just-
would come out.
Oh, I think
Why
we
don't
did
we
agree
just
to
take
was in the same manner.
part about the same manner, say, I think that'll be confusing. Why don't we take out same manner and say, I would begin by saying, a copy of each report shall, of IME shall be submitted to the board in the format and manner prescribed by the board. In addition, a copy of each report, the rest of them, I would,
I understand what you're saying. My understanding previous to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that what the committee's looking for us to do is to split this into two. There's a possible more significant revision that would go into effect or be looked at for legislative reform around the time BIS comes in. And
Yeah,
that would
that-
have that provision in it, the one that you're just describing. And then there's an interim period where people will consider whether during this interim period, we could just allow upload to the board,
Correct.
right, I think that's correct,
but not change, not otherwise remove the in the same manner, because the in the same manner would still apply in the interim to all the parties and the doctors.
everybody else.
Okay, so that's correct, and I guess, but I think there's a certain lack of clarity by saying in the same manner, so I would flip it, just the clauses, to say a copy of the report of independent matters. In other words, I would put the second
Okay.
sentence first, because I think it says, this is how the board gets it,
Sure.
And then,
Why do we say a copy? Should it not be the report of the independent medical examination?
Just using the existing statutory language refers to it as a copy.
So we would move that sentence up. And then keep a copy of each report for everybody else in the same day
Just
and
say
same manner.
report.
Yeah, and then we'll add to the report, obviously not for the statute, but the envisionment is that once BIS is up and functional, that same manner could be adjusted, provided that the injured worker continues to get a copy.
We're so close.
So I think this is where we are. The report of the independent medical examiner shall be submitted to the board in the format and manner prescribed by the chair. A copy of the report of the medical examination shall be submitted on the same day and in the same manner to the insurance carrier, the claimant's attending physician, or other attending practitioner, the claimant's representative, and the claimant.
A question, by you having the word by the practitioner there, if it's done by a vendor, then everyone's in violation of that.
No, the
It's allowed because IME entities are specifically allowed to perform the back
Okay.
office services, so that this statute is fine, just saying the practitioner.
No, it's not.
Now, aren't you
Operating on
removing the word by the practitioner?
That should be a strike-through.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, I'm saying the current statutory language that says by the practitioner, that IME doctors are not violating that by using IME entities because they're specifically allowed.
but isn't that a
that's what I'm
deletion there in your copy there, anyway?
No,
Yeah, by the
bracket is not a
practitioner.
deletion.
No, it's an addition.
I thought additions were
Additions are
underlined.
underlined and it's
Yeah,
strikeouts are
right,
crossed out.
the initial
What is that?
proposal that we were talking about at the beginning would bracket out the by the practitioner.
So it'll
But
read,
what we're saying now is we're basically going to keep most of the existing phraseology, just allowing that exemption for the board.
Oh, so this would be,
So the brackets would come out,
Yeah,
and
and that's existing language.
And where it says in the same manner to the board, we would delete the board there, right?
Yes.
yes, that's right.
Okay,
That's right.
so Stephanie, we're gonna delete that second, where it's bracketed out, yeah.
Yeah.
So the way that Stephanie has it right now, could it be interpreted to mean that the practitioner or IME entity doesn't necessarily have to serve all of the parties on the same day that it sends a copy to the board?
No.
It's two different sentences.
Absolutely allows for that.
And so, wouldn't, because it's your intent that day be the service day, right? So
Yeah.
you have to add something there
Yeah,
to make it clear that
Yeah.
on the same day that the party delivers to the board, gotta send to all these other parties in the same,
If at the
in
end
the
of-
same manner.
If at the end of the first sentence you put a semicolon
Yes.
and
Correct.
said on the same day,
Yeah,
a
that's
copy
okay.
of each report,
Mhm.
would that do it?
Yes.
Yes, and where it says practitioner, can we say practitioner or IME entities so that, though it's not enforced and we look to other areas, we clarify the language here too?
Yeah, we can say and or the IME entity.
I don't know, I have to
Isn't
think
that
about
dealt
that
with,
one.
isn't that dealt with in a separate subdivision of 137?
It is, so I
So
don't,
we-
I'd have
we're-
to chew on that a little bit.
So it's not necessary is what we're saying.
Well, a
There's a
physician will know
definitional
that.
provision
No,
further
no
back.
physician
There's
would
a
know
definitional
that.
provision and an entire regulation on it, so I don't think we need to, we don't need to say the practitioner or the practitioner's agent or anything like that. But one thing is, if we're looking to keep the language consistent with what it is now, I don't think we should really be a copy of
So start out with a copy.
Yeah. I mean, we're not trying to state that something else is an original versus a copy. I think we need to be consistent. So we'll officially send that around.
Question, should, as it goes, the same answer, on the same day, and just say distributed, we should use the word distributed to as opposed to submitted.
I think that's good.
That's right.
I
like
would
that.
prefer to see served upon.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
served
no.
is our normal term of art that we use, but I
But
think here,
doctors don't
because it's
serve
traditionally
things.
said submitted, it should probably say distributed.
Because doctors don't serve things, we distribute.
We have to think the word copy. If it's electronic, it's not a copy.
I do agree with that. There is some conflict in there.
So I think you have to take out a copy of
I mean,
in the beginning.
first three words.
David wanted a copy of to be left there, because that's what the current,
Yeah, we don't want to buy, one is an original and another.
Exactly.
I heard a witness before Congress this morning say, I delivered an original copy.
I think as attorneys, we've all said that.
It's the first one, I guess it's the original.
Yeah, and it's the one with the, it's the one with the wet signature, which almost never survives. The one with the wet signature goes to Binghamton, it's scanned and shredded.
Okay, so we'll get same day, same manner cleaned up and send that back out to the group to make sure we're all on the same page with
That's
that.
kind of
And we'll
cost.
send it out to everybody on the same day and in the same day.
And with regards to, also with regards to those general guiding principles for BIS, I guess we'll send those around as well.
All right, claimant questionnaire.
Oh, yeah, Stephanie, you want to take that one?
well, yeah, and, I think I really will defer to, Dr. Weinstein and maybe, Bill Turley. It seems that this was, something that was raised mostly by Justin and by Dr. Weinstein, and Joe to a certain extent. If a claimant questionnaire was going to be used, should it be a questionnaire that, is more limited in nature than some of the ones that we've seen included with IME reports, and if so, what would that look like? So, we have the
Is
questionnaire
that handout
samples,
to it?
2A and 2B, those were the samples that Justin and Dr. Weinstein shared with us. And then we also, in handout number 1, have proposed language to the regulations that would mention use of a claimant questionnaire. So that is on page 8 of handout number 1. Do you want to go over the language?
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically takes a situation where we don't have a chair of prescribed form, and now we would. It's pretty much as simple as that. It doesn't require that a questionnaire be used, it just says if a questionnaire is used, it would have to be the one promulgated by the chair.
And there are no restrictions on the use of the questionnaire.
Well, there's no restrictions on using the chair promulgated one.
So I'm not sure that I can agree to this, but I do have a question on the sample questionnaire itself. I'm not saying I agree with creating one that's mandated by the board, but my question is, on page 3 of handout 2A, when it starts to ask about activities of daily living, wouldn't it be appropriate to know the activities of daily living currently and the activities of daily living prior to the injury? I mean, you need a baseline, right? I'm not a medical practitioner, but.
Well, here, let me just explain my thoughts on handout 2B. This is Rick Weinstein. So my feeling is, we've all said this from the beginning, there's too much paperwork at workers' comp, too much for the doctors, too much for the insurance companies, and too much for the patients to fill out. So one of my requirements in having them fill out, the claimants fill out paperwork, was to try and restrict it to 1 page. And by doing that, I also eliminated a lot of the ambiguity which comes out in the longer document. So my thought is keep it simple, and this is an opening document where you can add information. It's not a complete document getting all the information, so it's kind of a launching pad to discussions with the claimant about what they're doing activity-wise, as well as work and everything else.
I want to follow that up because the questionnaire talks about activities of daily living, but when treating an injured worker, I would like to know what the duties, responsibilities, and the requirements of the job are, more than I do about the rest of it.
No, it has that.
It's in there.
I didn't say it, then I apologize.
Oh, that's good, I mean, but I guess to that point, your work history, that's a baseline. We know what you have to do at work. But there's no baseline as to whether or not I could have walked a mile before my injury. There's a good chance I couldn't have.
You never get every question answered in any questionnaire that's less than 20 pages. So that's why I restricted to 1 page. And having a longer document, I think, will be onerous for the people to fill out. And also, language requirements for all these people are variable now, English speaking.
Let's check how we get to the point.
Yeah, there's two different
that
documents.
we wanted the board to promulgate
Oh,
form.
I'm sorry.
Justin submitted a proposal
This
Yes.
section.
to a 3
Yeah, that should be good.
Oh, what?
Excuse me,
Yes, go
have
ahead,
we
Mindy.
decided that we definitely want to create a new form and that this is a good idea?
No,
No.
Good, because I don't think it is.
I don't either.
Can we
I
discuss
think
limiting
if
the
there
use
is
of
any
these
kind of
forms
I don't want to do
during
that.
hearings?
And we can discuss it, but I won't read it.
So let's just cut to the chase
If there is any
then.
kind of questionnaire, it should be as brief as possible, similar to what Justin had submitted previously, which is, I think it's pretty close to what handout 2B is. Handout 2A, I think this is horrendous. I really do. And I think the most honest person would answer some of these questions inaccurately. I'd have a problem answering some of these things about myself.
So, can I, sorry.
So I just think that, this is a very simple way to trip up claimants by using handout number 2A.
I agree with that. It doesn't say past medical and past surgical history. It says prior history, medical problems. Somebody will forget to list something and it'll be used against them.
And in addition to that, they're intimidated enough when they're going to these exams. You don't have to have them answering something like this.
I don't actually agree with any of that. I think these are pretty typical of what I would get at my regular doctor. But, and you're right, you might forget, for instance, it says past surgery. I might forget that I had a cesarean section 36 years ago. But I don't think it's relevant to anything that's going on now. I don't know that I don't think these are specifically designed to trip anybody up, and I think that they're designed to give the doctor a clear picture of what he needs to know in order to make an assessment of the claimant and their abilities and how disabled they may or may not be at the moment. So I am not in favor of the board creating yet another form. I think to the extent that a doctor needs to ask these questions,
you know, I just think we should let it continue as it is.
And I don't think we're gonna reach consensus on this issue.
Okay. Next topic.
And back to the not using.
Who's with the shot?
the hearing.
All right,
We're not-
timing of requests for information filing, the IME 3.
Wait, before we move on.
Yes?
Quick question. So we're not gonna restrict people from filling out questionnaires, because that was one of the discussions we had.
That's correct.
Okay.
We haven't reached consensus to restrict them.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Request for information filing?
Right, so this is proposed language for a revision to workers' comp law, section 137(1)B, and it would address some of the concerns that were noted by stakeholders with the having to file the IME 3 within 10 days of receipt, which creates additional paperwork potentially for the physician. So this would add the phrase at the end.
Which is not underlined, I just,
Yeah.
to be clear. So everything beginning or at the time
New language?
through whichever is later is new. Or proposed, I should say.
Right, so this would essentially allow the signed IME 3 to come in at the same time that the IME 4 is sent in by the physician with their report, as opposed to having its own 10-day requirement.
I think that was one everyone agreed with, also last time, but you wanted to see some proposed language.
I don't remember who to do it.
Okay, so we can talk about it. I mean, I guess that's the purpose of providing there were some requests for suggestions. This is what's being proposed, because I think that the point is the IME 3 doesn't necessarily need to be looked at until the IME 4 comes in. So the question is, what are the concerns, or are there concerns about extending that deadline to file with the IME 4?
And it would do a couple of things. It would save some effort on the IME doctor's part in sending that in, or having the IME entity send it in separately, but it also would allow the double filing of both the request for information and the response to the request for information. So you, in effect, have one document that says, I was asked to evaluate the left shoulder. They'd have to attach, if it's written, the electronic or however it's communicated, email, whatever the request was, they'd have to attach that. They have to indicate, and I did evaluate and it's in the report, then they'd have the report, so you cover both ends of those statutory requirements. So it's really a convenience tool as opposed to, it doesn't water down any requirements to provide the information. The information would still need to be reported, or else risk preclusion for failure to report.
Discussion? Questions?
It's good with me.
I'm good with it. The silence is deafening.
Joe, Love?
I vote nay.
I don't have to vote.
What bothers you about it, Joe? I'm not convinced that it helps injured workers.
Does it hurt them?
I think it may help them as well as everybody else in you know, sort of smoothing the system over a little bit. I don't see where it harms them, and I think to the extent that it makes things move a little more smoothly, I think it would be probably beneficial. If you could explain why it would be harmful, maybe that would be better, and maybe we could fix it a little bit.
I'm not convinced that it helps. I've done this long enough to see things that smooth the system, that benefit the carrier and the employer, don't garner much attention, and things that smooth the system and help the injured worker, face insurmountable hurdles. I don't see how this helps injured workers, and I'm not comfortable voting for it.
That's not the question. My question is, how is it harmful? How is it an obstacle?
I don't owe you the answer to which you think you're entitled. I've explained to you my reasoning.
I didn't think I'm entitled. I thought this was a conversation and a committee, but that's okay. If it's not, that's fine.
Did you want to add anything?
No?
Would it help if we explained briefly, maybe for Joe's benefit, what it is that happens with this form and why it is so cumbersome? I know you explained it last time, Stephanie, in a way that was like very clear.
Yeah, so the timing of this specific form is prior to the IME, and it's a scenario where the insurance company has specific questions that they would like to have the IME physician answer. And so they submit those to the IME entity. IME entity forwards them along to the physician along with the IME 3 form. And that form is required to be signed by the doctor, attesting that he received this form of communication, these questions to be answered within 10 days. And what we've heard is that the doctors feel like it's just another burden, another step that needs to be, jumped through in order to get the IME completed, and it doesn't really serve any additional value. The same value would be received if it was submitted at the same time as the IME 4 report. And I know Justin liked the IME 3s, but more so on the other end, after the IME has occurred, as a notice basically that there may be an addendum, that there are additional questions that are coming out after the IME 4 report has been sent in. So this is just addressing those pre-IME 4 questions.
I'm not there. I think that we should have timely notice of the carrier reaching out to their so-called independent agent here. I think that there certainly was a reason for this to be passed, we don't want the carrier talking to the IME provider without everybody else knowing. I think that, relaxing this, one, doesn't help injured workers, and two, has the potential to harm them. I'm not comfortable with it.
Okay.
Flexible scheduling of IME time.
Okay, so on this topic, we briefly discussed allowing some flexibility in the times that IMEs are scheduled, both, within a specific day and also potentially on a weekend. So in handout 1, we have proposed language we said that we would come back to you with. It's on page 5. So this is saying it is to be scheduled during regular business hours, but may not be scheduled before 8 a.m. or after 7 p.m., except with the consent and for the convenience of the claimant. Claimant shall not be required to attend an IME when such examination is scheduled on a day of religious observance, any particular day or days or any portion thereof which the claimant observes as a Sabbath or other holy day or days in accordance with the requirements of his or her religion.
I don't think you need the ends for the convenience. If the claimant consents, then you can presume it's convenient for them.
I'm not sure that we need the independent medical examination may be scheduled, the words during the independent medical examiner's regular business hours, simply because if it's more convenient for a claimant, and you're trying to work with a claimant, and I can do Sunday at 3 o'clock, and the IME is willing to do it, even though it's not their regular business hours, this would preclude it. And I don't think that's what we want.
Well, there's an exception.
Pardon?
There's the exception.
Except with I thought that the exception referred to the hours of between 8 and 7 rather than the
That's,
day.
yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
And,
Right.
and so if I'm not open on a Sunday, I can't do it on a Sunday. I can do it on a Saturday later if I'm open on a Saturday. I mean, it just need, I think there's a little tinkering to fix that, but
And also subsection 9, where it talks about regular business hours on page 10. This would be limiting as well, so we need to edit this. It's the third paragraph down.
I think one of the
I'm sorry we
problems-
didn't note this, but that was actually going to be recommended as a delete and move to put this with the notice provision, so thank you for doing that.
If we talk about regular business hours of the examiner, and we're allowing retired physicians to still be doing these, they don't have regular business hours.
Can we take out the words of the physician and just say during regular business hours? Or just put the hours specifically?
why don't we just take out during the independent medical examiner's regular business hours? And it could say the independent medical examination may be scheduled.
But I wouldn't eliminate Saturdays either, because I think that's mutually agreed upon by a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's what we were trying to get at, right? To allow for
You
some
can say
some
Monday through
flexibility.
Friday.
I think it starts by saying like Monday through Friday, 8 to 7, and then it goes on to modify it for any, other times with the consent of the claimant. And then you limit
Right.
holidays and religious observance.
We're saying the same things, just we're saying it more clearly that way, yeah.
So, or any other times with the consent of the claimant.
I also like the way this is written a lot more than officially recognized holidays on the part 10. I'm not sure what's an officially recognized holiday.
I think the board actually has several days that we don't hold hearings. Are those the official?
It's going away under this, right? 10 is
Yeah,
being
this is broader.
deleted.
There's a whole nother term for it.
So should
So
we
then
make,
all you're going to be doing is deleting the 4 words, the independent medical examiners in the 3rd line, and then keep everything else there.
yeah, so should we make those edits now, just so everyone can see?
Yeah.
And then you wanted to add, or any other times with the consent?
You don't need to add anything in.
In the parenthetical material, can we take out the word particular? I only say that because Word frequently scolds me to use more concise language.
So we're taking out during the independent medical examiner's regular business hours.
No, you're leaving in regular business hours. Be scheduled during regular business hours. Keep during, and then kill that. And keep regular, there you go. Thank you.
And when you say that, recognize holidays, or, I just want to think, maybe, is Veterans Day a day that the board closes that doesn't hold hearings?
Veterans Day?
Yes.
So for instance, it would be good if a doctor would be allowed to have, I wouldn't want to get precluded because we scheduled an IME for a
A
Veterans
lot of
Day.
doctors did some Veterans Day this week, so.
Yeah, but Veterans Day is not considered a religious holiday.
No, but we were talking about other days that are considered holidays by the board.
That language is being taken out.
Is that language being taken out?
The
Yeah.
official
But
language.
again, if it's
Oh.
by the consent of the two parties, then they can
Okay,
have the
great.
employment on Veterans Day.
So if we agree also to delete that section on regular business hours on page 10, do we have to add something here to make the allowance for, nights and weekends like we discussed?
Well, we're gonna strike that section out, right?
Yeah, that's gonna get-
Yeah, no, that's gonna be stricken, but do we wanna add something here that allows for it, in the notice section that we're working on?
I didn't realize it was gonna be stricken, I thought it was gonna be moved to be included in.
I believe it's okay because it now says except with the consent and for the convenience of the claimant.
Except that someone pointed out, right, Matt, that it reads as if it's referring to the 8 AM or after 7 PM. That it's responsive to that clause and not the regular business hours.
So I
maybe we
also
have to
think-
clarify that.
Why could you not say the independent medical examination may be scheduled Monday through Friday between the hours of 8 AM and 7 PM unless otherwise agreed to?
Yes, I like that, that's a lot clearer.
That's fine.
So I think that we should talk about holidays, both religious and secular.
Yeah, and we can keep the, right?
And I would like to keep the convenience of the injured worker. They wouldn't consent if it
It
wasn't
doesn't,
convenient.
it doesn't matter.
Okay.
That word convenience doesn't matter.
Especially if we're adding unless otherwise agreed to, which is, if everybody agrees, that would be because of the convenience. Is everyone okay with that, the Monday through Friday, 8 AM, 7 PM, unless otherwise agreed to?
And it says, you have to exclude the religious and secular holidays, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And then we're adding a show.
Okay.
Okay, so you want to clean that up and send it to the group for final sign off? We're all in agreement to make that change, correct?
So she's working on it now, so everyone can see it.
So is Monday through Friday between the hours of 8 AM to 7 PM?
Unless otherwise agreed to,
Okay.
period. I think that makes it more clear than what we had before.
Because we actually did see that there are some that occur on Saturdays,
Right.
so,
Yeah.
okay.
Just a question. There are individuals that observe Friday as their Sabbath or Friday afternoon for about an hour before sunset. So by saying that it's permissible to schedule it 8 to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, I think might create an obstacle, very limited but a very important population, series of populations.
Now, I think actually, anybody can, I think it's pretty clear that a claimant just has to say, I can't make that time and reschedule. So I don't,
what was.
And it's modified by the. Right, so sundown on Friday would be taken care
It's
of.
covered under the Sabbath.
The
It's
Sabbath,
it's
yeah.
modified by the
I
next
do-
sentence.
We're gaining an hour here.
We lost you.
My understanding is we crossed that out, so when we see the language, if it's inclusive, that'll be fine.
Right, what did we agree on? We're keeping the holiday language, so it
Yeah.
should be fine. Should be taken care of, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right.
So before we go, I think we're just looking at religious holidays and not secular. And
Yeah,
I think
let's
that,
add that, yeah.
okay.
But
So
can
it
we-
would be
can we add
instead of
that-
religious observance.
Instead of, hold on, I gotta go back to this. Claimant should not be required to attend. If we add, secular or federal holidays, that probably would be the cleanest way of doing that. Otherwise, we're gonna have Halloween in there. But federal holidays, I think would be better put, under the beginning part of it, which is the independent medical exam may be scheduled Monday through Friday between the hours of lot exclusive of federal holidays unless otherwise agreed to. And the reason I would do that is because somebody may very well want to do this on a federal holiday that they have off.
No.
And I don't want to
No, no.
preclude them.
Okay.
Okay.
So between 8 AM and 6 PM, exclusive of federal holidays?
Unless otherwise.
But, I mean, if we're gonna get overly, shouldn't the shouldn't the holiday piece come after Friday?
Sure, I like, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Either way. But yours is probably cleaner.
Because then you get some knucklehead who says, oh no, it's a federal holiday, so I can schedule it at 8 PM. Because what that modifies is the time and not the days.
I bet that would be an attorney, because we're good at that, right?
So my other question is, Stephanie, you mentioned earlier a list of recognized holidays that the board maintains.
There's, I believe there's a list.
Board publishes a subject number every year.
I think if there's any,
Federal holidays,
is it any, I'm trying to think of,
we only publish the holidays, so we publish basically federal holidays.
are there are no holidays that the board observes that are not also federal holidays?
I can't think of.
We should observe Chair's Day.
Yeah, I don't think we have any
Every
without
day.
that.
Every day is Chair's Day.
Yeah, I think it's a floater for us, so.
So, but it's not on that list. That's
What holiday?
a election day.
Yeah, no,
Not
that's-
really a holiday.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, we do basically the same ones. Christmas, New Year's, Veterans, yes. Thanksgiving, Fourth of July.
So we can send around revised language.
Okay.
But this was not otherwise included as a recommendation, but it seems that we're there now, that we
Right.
are going to be making this a recommendation.
Okay, sounds good, thank you, Stephanie. Moving
All right, the last,
Not federal days and the board can be open to federal holidays, right? If there is that one-off day.
Oh, you want to use workers' comp board days?
Yeah.
We'll go 40 minutes.
State observed holidays, that's way better.
Or
So
you
state
could
observed holidays.
ask, just so you can add defined in that schedule you put out, because otherwise, how the heck do I know what's a state observed holiday? I don't know if they are. If you're putting it out a notice anyhow, then
Yeah,
just
we
reference the
publish it.
notice,
We publish it each year.
then reference the notice. If that's okay with everybody.
I think we should get ourselves appointed to the holiday.
Committee.
Holiday committee?
Yeah,
I think we should just be,
the
it.
uniform holiday observance.
We
All
got
right.
a cat with that.
I think let's move
Yeah.
on to cause for
So
removal.
just, yeah, and just be mindful of the time, it's 1:40, we wanted to allocate at least an hour to this, we're a little over, so.
I'll be mindful.
So David, did you want to let folks know what this one is about?
Sure, this came out of a concern I think initially raised by Joe about finding a way to, in effect, discipline a IME provider under our existing disciplinary rules, and maybe come up with a way to specifically focus on some concerns that have been raised with particular IME providers. And the language you see here would be a revision to 13D2. It would not, so I don't want to bury the lead, it would not strictly focus on IME providers because we don't have any ability in our statute to specifically focus on IME providers. But let me just explain what the language is nonetheless. So it would go into our removal section, which is 13D2. 13D is the disciplinary section. It has more than just removal. It has suspension, revocation. It has hearings under certain parameters. But this deals with the list of types of behaviors that would lead to a removal from the list. So the language would contemplate a fair warning going out to that particular provider. That's the notice from the chair. And it says, or any and we're going to get to the violation here, but notice from the chair board or any duly authorized officer of the state. When we say state, we mean the board. That's borrowed from existing language that's already in the disciplinary section, so I don't want people to think this is about people from tax and finance of the Department of State. We're talking about the Workers' Compensation Board. So after that fair warning, we nonetheless see a continuation of a practice of the profession that really rises up to the level of misconduct. The language you see here that talks about practices in a manner evidencing a willful or negligent failure to comply is largely borrowed from the education law. So this is the licensing provisions under 6530 subdivision 16 of the education law. And when we talk about using this with respect to IME providers, the types of irregularities that we see involve things like refusal to allow the claimant to videotape, or videotaping without disclosing it on the IME-5, or where we see a pattern of, let's say, conducting IMEs in substandard facilities, or inappropriately using chaperones as part of the conduct of the IME examination, that sort of thing. So it's that level of misconduct that gets into the quality issues that we would be able to define misconduct. We already have a provision in our law in 13D2A that allows us to remove a provider who is guilty of professional misconduct. This language in the proposed 2H would help kind of fill the gaps for allowing us to define what the norms and violation of those norms are that would constitute misconduct. And as I said, so it's designed actually to get away from being perceived as making these rules up as we go along. We would tie them to the rules that we promulgate under the provisions of the Workers' Compensation Law. And again, we would use the same standard that the education law uses in trying to define what that professional misconduct means. So again, like I said at the very outset, and it's because we don't have a specific provision under our disciplinary rules called IME onlys. That's why it's written this way. But I understand that this is just the IME committee. So anyway, that's the language. So.
I have a question. When we talk about the Department of Education and the censures and impacts on physicians, they usually address quality of care and patient safety issues. The first example you used about whether or not somebody's complying with the footnote on video, in my mind, doesn't rise to that. So I think that this is unduly harsh unless we somehow qualify what the word notice is. After notice, which informs the physician or other examiner as to the need for, and then make it that it follows an opportunity for education and compliance. Otherwise, this will impact an ability to get hospital privileges, medical malpractice insurance, and maintain one's license. And at the same time, not having any patient safety issue for a number of the examples you gave. So I would feel very strongly against this language.
Anyone else?
Well, I have a similar concern about the breadth of the language, because it doesn't require that the physician be notified what act or omission on his or her part the board thinks is willful or negligent failure to comply with the provisions.
So is that a clarification?
I would like a specificity in the notice. You know, if a treating physician is being disciplined for, or is being reprimanded for not filing the right form, I want the treating physician to know that that's the reason for the complaint. And similarly, if an IME is being scolded for not allowing videotaping, I want the IME to know that that's the reason.
And Dr. Wilbur is saying they need an opportunity to be educated and an opportunity to cure.
Well, that's,
Yes.
that's the nature of a warning, and this language is similar to other warning provisions in the public health law, and the education law, and the workers' comp law. I mean, we could certainly spell out what we mean by warning and say, you know, like move the substance that's down in the second half, we can move it to the first half and say that that's what the notice is with specificity, and then a continuation of practice in outside or failure to comply with the notice could lead to removal. Yeah, that's fine. That's wordsmithing that can easily be done.
Can we see that before we shake our heads yes for something like that?
Yeah, we can make those edits and circulate.
Thank you.
I don't know if this has really been addressed totally, but I think this is really sort of vague, to comply with substantial provisions of this chapter or rules promulgated by the chair. Like what provisions, what rules? I know you're envisioning something, David, you specified, but I mean, this could be anything.
Well, it's about professional misconduct. And so, like, we don't have a definition of professional misconduct in the rules. So that's why we wanted to see what the licensing board looks at in its definition of professional misconduct. So that's what that is all about. We can certainly be more specific than they are. I mean, we'd be happy to list out 15, 20, 30 things that could constitute professional misconduct.
I think that those things should be limited to rules promulgated specifically for the conduct of medical IMEs. So you're not gonna, you say you can't limit it to IME providers, right? Because you can have people who do both. But I think that this provision should be limited to misconduct during IMEs.
I would object to that. I think it's much more equitable to apply to anybody.
No, but I think what Joe was saying is under 2, it says the chair shall remove from the list of, it could say IME providers right there, so it doesn't affect one's ability to practice medicine.
Well, 2 has, then you'd be restricting the board's current ability to can any providers. But because we're tasked with looking at IMEs, I think that it would be inappropriate to make such a wide ranging recommendation. I think that we should limit it to, failure to comply with substantial provisions of, the chapter that govern conduct of IMEs.
We could do that, because there's lots of other provisions in 13D that, you could have, if somebody's an IME and a treating, they could be, if they fall into the 13D2H language, they could be removed from their IME authorization, but there may be other provisions, like 13D2A that they could violate, and could be handled on that track at the same time. So we could definitely do that.
For those of us that are not lawyers, could you distribute that 13,
The whole thing?
2B language?
We
Yeah,
could send out 13D.
thank
But
you.
13D2A is removal for where you're guilty of professional misconduct.
I actually I object to this. I object to the language. I think it's, I think it's too vague, and I think it's, it puts, I think anybody who does not practice in a professional manner should be subject to the same, removal procedure. I don't see why it should only apply to IMEs.
So, I mean, the
So
purpose
it's
here
no
is because there was a request to try to distribute some language and what it would look like. That's what this is. It's not,
Okay, well,
Right, but it sounds like there's no consensus right
Right.
on this.
So should you even send additional language around and?
No.
or-
No.
No.
Okay.
All right, thank you guys.
All right.
Apropos, consensus on topic. I think we know what the consensus is. We don't need to
Yeah,
discuss.
we don't need to go
Yeah,
back.
we have a
we've got
sense of
We've
what.
got a
the-
roadmap.
Right.
All right, so, the report. You don't, you want to keep calm to it, right? We don't want to get
We should take a 10-minute break. Yeah.
Thank you.
we should take a break. Okay.
Yes, 10-minute break, everyone. We have 137-1A, which is the same day, same manner. And then we also have the flexible scheduling. I wanted to put it up one more time for folks to give a read. If there's any additional edits or wordsmithing you'd like to do, if we could close it down and incorporate that into the revised report that we'll be submitting to you within the week, that would be great.
So on the same day, same manner, is there going to be that broader,
Yeah, and your
future piece?
recommendation. Yeah. This
All
is
right.
just for right now.
as soon as possible.
And then the concept will be that it would be expanded once the business re-engineering is complete to allow electronic service and paper to the individual.
We would expect that this recommendation in effect constitutes an interim step, and these recommendations would include the summary of principles.
I would like to see the entire thing before I commit.
Okay.
Like I said, I hadn't thought about this, the board-only exemption, so
Okay.
I just don't want to, if there's a problem later, I don't want anyone to say or think that I'm agreeing to it now.
Understood.
And I still see the words by the practitioner. I was told that elsewhere, practitioner and/or vendor is defined. Would there be any objection if we took off those three, just said distributed on the same day and take out by whom?
Is everyone okay with that?
No, I mean, there
You're
has to be some
responsible
tie
to
to
do
the fact.
distribution.
I'm sorry.
You both spoke at the same time.
Saying the same
You canceled
thing.
each other
You
out.
can't have,
I think you're saying the same thing.
just some random person distributing through the court. It either has to be the practitioner or a duly registered IME entity. Fine saying that.
I'm fine with that. That's better putting that in, or distributed in a manner as prescribed by the chair, which covers that too. Either way would do it.
Okay. How about we do it the way David suggested, just adding or duly, everything you just said.
Okay.
Okay. Joe?
Are we going to, we're going on to the scheduling?
Sure. Yeah.
So, I would feel more comfortable if we reference the board holiday holidays, or the board acknowledged, or state acknowledged, however, Maribeth, you phrased it before.
Yeah, I had, except for state observed holidays.
What's the significance of following the board holidays?
Well, I would imagine that the board is going to always include federal holidays, and there might be something, that pops up. It hasn't happened in decades, but for a very long time, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day was a state holiday, but not a federal holiday. So it's not inconceivable.
And also the way President's Day is viewed. Sometimes it's the Monday day, so this, I think I'm clarifying it like this works.
Okay.
That's okay with me.
Okay.
So we'll get the other language for the future vision added to that.
Okay. All right, thank you, everyone. Now on to the
All right.
recorder.
So at this point, we'd like to begin talking about the draft report that all of you have had and had commented on. As we're going through this, keep in mind, and be conscious of, we all have different writing styles. And the idea is we believe to have captured the changes that you suggested that were potentially things that were misspoken or factual errors. If we have an hour to complete this, and so hopefully we don't spend a lot of time wordsmithing. We can. I think they did a really good job incorporating everyone's comments. So I'd like to turn it back over to Stephanie to talk about the recommendations.
Okay, so I'm pulling up the version. There's two versions of the report that are included in your packet. One is a consolidated version where we try to take into account as many comments as we could and put together a concise report for you. That's the one that I hope to be pulling up here.
So Stephanie, since they're not named any differently, that's you're referring to the one that's 43 pages, right? This is the 33 pages, just so people can follow it. Because the one that's 43 pages is the one that I think is tracking all comments, right? That's the one you're talking about?
Yes.
It's 27, 20.
So this one's 43 pages, and in your package it's a thinner one because it's double-sided. And the bigger one is just single-sided, so I think Stephanie wants us to start with the double-sided one. The thinner.
Are they both double-sided?
They're both double-sided. No, well, not here, sorry. You guys have someone else printing them for you, so that's not helpful. But we'll look at the page numbers.
We have one that says page 27 of 20. I assume that's the longer one.
Yeah, see, ours are printed without page numbers, so that's
All right, so
all around not helpful.
Well, we can just talk about what section we're in. So we're going to go into.
Let's go to part 4.
But we have two, we can talk about sections, but we have two versions.
To the executive summary.
There was a request to bring in some of the utilization.
Right. I figured we'd do several and utilization.
Yep.
Can we stay on page 3 for just a quick minute? When I made my suggestion about MD and DO, I was told there was statutory language that had to stay that way, but also down below for the names of the physicians. The term doctor is being co-opted by all sorts of people, and what I would like to see is after my name and that of Dr. Quad, Dr. Weinstein, that we list our professional degrees and not say doctor. So I want to be identified as a DO, and I'd like the other two doctors to do whatever they want.
Well,
I don't think anybody objects to that.
I think that's a good idea.
DOMDMD.
Yes. Thank you.
Again, we haven't identified which version we're working on,
Right.
so I just want to help people do that. What's it called, Stephanie? The one you want us to look at? Is the one that says
I
tracking?
only have it, the name of the electronic file.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
what is it?
when you go to part 1, the first comment is,
I identified it by the way she named it. So
I know,
this-
but if you go to part 1, you can see that it's different. So it allows us to look at.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Tell me what you named it, the one you're looking at. Tell me what you named it.
The one that I would like to go through is called IME Advisory Recommendations version 10-1030-19, tracking all committee comments.
Okay, that's the one that's 43 pages, so I was correct. That's
Fat or thin?
That,
for you guys. For you guys,
No, we're gonna do
it's the
the
thin
thin
one.
one.
So,
We want the smaller one, Stephanie.
43.
So the draft incorporating committee comments, sorry,
Oh,
It's a thinner one.
IME
Okay, that's
advisory
the thinner one.
recommendations, 10-30-19, draft incorporating committee comments, sorry.
And when you go to part one, the first comment on the right would be, Joe C, this description should be enhanced.
Yes.
Okay. Did you, remotely, did you hear that? So for purposes of going through which version, if you go to part one, the first comment that'll be on the right-hand column is comment CN4, comment Joe C. It's along the
That's the
bullet.
one that incorporates everything as opposed to.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, change that to our degrees. Please delete the DR in front of them. We're not Dr. Sandwiches in that way.
Got it.
Got it.
Thanks.
Okay, so everyone has the same version in front of them, so
Okay.
we can follow?
So, yep.
Okay.
So I believe that in the intro part, Joe, you wanted more of a discussion of, to incorporate some of the 2018 utilization study key findings. So, instead of just referencing it, we can incorporate, we can add, some key findings, key points. Well, we were gonna go through every single.
We're not gonna go through every single
Unless you-
comment.
Can you just scroll up so we can see what the background part one should look like? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Just to make sure everybody, okay. This is what this is the one we're working on, everyone.
Right.
Just,
All right, that's what it is.
So, yeah, again, unless folks have,
Glaring errors that they want us to see
or
fixed.
right, what I would like to just do is indicate that we will add the key findings from the IME utilization study, where we reference it the first time, which would be in this introduction section. So we can have this in the draft that we plan to return to you in a week's time. And essentially, the thought was that we would go through the key findings that were summarized in each section of the report already, and basically include that in the report. So like there were, each
Is that what you were
section
looking for?
of the
Yeah.
utilization study had
So-
about 4 or 5 bullets.
I think that it's important to put that up front, that this is not, it wasn't unfounded, that there are a lot of people doing very, very high numbers of these, and there are the data show that there are some issues there. And you don't even have to characterize it, that the data show that there are issues there, just provide some of the data.
You wanna put the context around.
That's the part.
So, because we're assuming, most people are gonna just read this report, so. So it sounds like you're on the right track in terms of bringing the highlights into this report as part of the introduction, so there's context, because
I don't think it's fitting in the introduction.
I think there's gonna
The
be,
nature of the introduction is the introduction. You don't get details in your intro. In your introduction.
well, I think what's not here is an executive summary, which will be. So it would be the executive summary, intro.
Executive summary. I mean, the purpose of an intro is just to be an intro.
I mean, let's be serious. The further along in this report we get, the more drop off we're going to get, right? So if 100 people pick up the report, 99 are going to read the first page, 98 are going to read the second page. By the time you get to page 5, you're looking at 60 at best. So I think that some of this is important information should be up front.
I think that's the purpose of the executive summary. Key findings over your executive summary. Your intro is just, again, your intro.
How do others feel?
Well, I tend to agree that the key findings don't have to go into the introduction. We're limiting, on purpose, we're limiting the amount of information that we're putting into this, including the survey results and everything else. So, I mean, the committee survey results. So if we're doing one, I think that it's only proper that we do them both, because they would both find their way into the flavor of them would find their way into the executive summary rather than the document itself. And the executive summary is going to be the one that 98 people read, so you might lose 2.
Depends on how many pages it is.
It's true.
Okay, so
Just to clarify though, the executive summary, I think we expect to be no more than 2 or 3 pages, right? I mean,
Yeah.
paragraphs
If
even.
that,
if
yeah.
that, right, okay.
I think we said like 2 or 3 paragraphs. Not very long.
Well, I mean, what it sort of boils down to is this, right? So, I mean, we're not discussing Joe's first comment here. And if we'd like to put that in, I would add a few words, and then we could do that. You won't want the words I'm going to add. But, the idea last time was to get out of editorializing and just sort of memorialize. And I think that to a certain degree, the very nature of the survey, or I should say the utilization study, which was based on a survey, has a certain amount of editorializing that we worked our way through. So I think we have to just be careful how we use any of these things, or else we're going to get back into editorializing.
So then don't use the survey portion of the utilization study. I mean, there's a big part of that that's data. I mean, there's no denying that 10 of these people did a whole bunch of these exams, and there's certain things that that the data show, and don't draw any conclusions. I think that a little bit of that is appropriate. As far as the first comment, I'm interested to see what you would add. They are a litigation tool. We've seen it here today. There was an unwillingness
That's
to.
right. So here's what
there
I
was
had.
an unwillingness to preclude the use of the survey questionnaires that injured workers are presented with. This is, whether we define it here or not, this is a litigation tool.
Right.
Now, I think that if we don't define it here, it's like we're hiding something.
So we're not going to put this in, so I don't really want to waste a lot of time here. But, I mean, if you really were serious about it, we could say something along the lines of, specifically that they're used as a litigation tool most often to challenge what are quite often biased reports by the treating physician. I mean, you can't get around that reality either.
Yeah, we're gonna go back and forth with this. We know we're not gonna reach it.
We're not, and that's my point, but
Let's move on, because we're not gonna.
that's perfectly fine. But my point is, if we're going to include anything, the idea of using simply data is one thing, but it certainly doesn't belong in the introduction. It would be part of the sort of the defining part of the executive summary.
I think data is the only objective thing we have. It's the only thing we can't disagree with, because it's objective data.
But it doesn't necessarily belong in the introduction. You would agree with that, or?
I think it should be in the executive summary. I think that's part of the reason we formed this whole committee.
So I think it sounds like there's consensus on that. I understand, Joe, you disagree, but
I think we should move on.
okay.
All right, so. Excuse me, can I just say, in terms of, part 1 in the introduction, if we're still talking, if I can just mention, rather than the word veracity, could we talk about the word, we put in the word reliability? I think
Mindy, where are you reading?
in the introduction, part 1, 2017 reforms, questions have been raised about IME availability, quality, and veracity.
No, that's out.
I have
Veracity
fraud.
I have potential fraud.
I have that crossed out. I'm
So
sorry. I
you're
must
working
be
on use the other draft. Maybe.
Okay, I have like 4 drafts.
Next time we'll name them different things so that we can
Well,
follow.
next time it'll just be one.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay,
Do you
I'm
see
sorry,
now that
I
it says
apologize.
fraud? Okay,
Yeah.
all right, no problem.
Right, so the thought was to, unless folks had other sections of the report that you'd like to specifically discuss, move to section 4 where we talk about each of the topics, and then section 5 where we talk about the recommendations.
I had one that I thought was important to mention.
Okay.
It was key. All right, I have page 8 of 20. Footnote 3 says that the survey responses are included in the appendix. I think that they're out.
Oh, good catch.
Yeah. And then also my comment here, whether I put it in the wrong spot or it's just reflected here in the wrong spot, I do think that we should put something in here about do not use lists.
We never decided that they were universally used, or
What?
that they even existed. Did anyone give us any evidence that they did?
Yeah,
Yes.
we had
No.
a
Yes,
couple of
we-
examples.
Yeah, we had a
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so not universal use. I'm not disputing that, but a couple came in with examples.
But, so can I, and I'm not agreeing that we put this in, but if we were to put this in, I mean, you'd need to get into a full discussion as to why they would even exist. So why are they not used? Yeah, I think you're making you're coming at it from a certain vantage point where they're not being used because they're not favorable necessarily to.
Doesn't even have to say that. Just
No,
the fact that they exist, I think, is important.
But I think it's important if we ever went there and talked about it, that to note that they exist in cases where employers are using them to avoid bad IMEs, ones that, for instance, would be precluded by workers' compensation.
Well,
It's
interestingly,
a very different connotation than saying that they're do not use lists because they're not favorable to that to their position.
Interestingly,
So it's probably better off not using it at all.
at least one of the lists had some reasons, and some of them were, reasons that you would expect, and then other ones were not quite as clear, which, raised my interest. But either way, I'm not suggesting that we put in do not use lists for X or Y reason, but the fact that they exist, I think, is important, and I think that it's important in connection with considering the amount of control and power the IME entities have over this aspect of the system. That they are coming up with lists of doctors that they're not going to use. Yeah.
So what's the relevance, though?
The fact that they exist, I think, is very relevant. I'm not going to die on this hill, right? But I think that it is important, and it's something that I would like to see in.
I don't know.
It's in the footnote,
I don't even think it belongs in a footnote.
I think a footnote is.
but it is in the footnote currently.
Where is it? Help me.
Footnote number
2.
Yeah. 2.
Footnote 2. Do not use list.
I mean, it's,
No, then. But no, two.
no, that's 3, that's 2.
Here.
So here's the thing.
It's not getting
It's
the
in
same
the-
exact
I
point.
think that it's in the wrong spot, though, right? Shouldn't we put that in the
Well, if we
in the
have-
conversation of do not use
The
list?
the heading is information and data considered. So for the second bullet, if it read, the claims administered a survey that inquired into do not use list of physician IMEs as well as their manual, then it's not saying we're questioning the existence of, and it's just a declarative sense, we did consider it. So let's keep the word into, and I would delete
And I would
the
move- I think
existence
so-
of and whether each would share.
I do, but I'm having a hard time.
I think the footnote belongs after the second bullet. That's the problem. Joe's right.
So we could move that footnote.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm getting.
Okay.
Thank you, Mindy.
So, Stephanie, you follow, right? It's just moving that footnote up?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so part four.
Part four. So, again, here what we tried to do is mention each of the topics that were raised, have it be completely neutral, no editorial comments in there. The majority of these topics we did not reach consensus on. I guess what we're looking for here is whether you're comfortable with the language that's in here as written, or if there are any additional edits that are needed for this final version.
How do you envision the executive summary being written vis-a-vis the recommendations, the consensus recommendations, versus everything else that we did, which is part and parcel, I think, to a comment I made, which was that I think we should start with the consensus topics and then go into everything else, just so they're more highlighted and they stand out from, to Joe's point, you're going to read through a long document. It, I think, makes sense to say these are the things we get consensus about, and if we're going to mirror that in the executive summary. So,
I think that is what we discussed, right? Yeah, highlighting there the topics of consensus. Right?
So you're suggesting move part 5 to the front of the report?
I don't think part 5 is a more detailed version of what's going to go in the executive summary. So at least, I think what we were thinking about with the executive summary is like a brief description of the process we went through, the different topics covered, the subjects that consensus reached on at a fairly high level. And then you have the details behind it and then more detailed recommendations in part 5.
well, it strikes me that would go first. I mean, that seems to be the more, I don't know, that's the real takeaway, right? So you put that up front and you say these are the other topics discussed. I would swap 4 and 5. I mean, let's do my
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, I don't know how the rest of the committee feels.
I don't think it's the end of the day, but I think it makes more sense.
How does everyone else feel swapping sections 4 and 5, or parts 4 and 5? Giving people the highlights right up front.
Because we've already given them the exciting conclusion in the executive summary.
Any concerns with moving it?
I see some heads nodding.
Everyone's okay with moving?
Okay.
3, 4, 5? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So maybe you guys can make on one page here. Okay, so we'll move 5 ahead of 4, and then just going through sections in 4. I think we had some that were still open items which we resolved today. But we left a few of the comments in the margins that were not completely addressed for people to consider whether or not we needed to tweak things or if they were okay with draft.
I saw a small typo in allow telemedicine, which is 4.1.2. Shouldn't it be in that first sentence, only 30% of internists authorized to perform IME actually perform them? Said actually.
Oh, okay, actually.
I read actually, as you said.
Okay, thank you. You see that, right, Stephanie?
It's actually I don't see
Third line, so it's 4.1.2, third line of that paragraph.
Actual performance, got it. Thank you.
So as far as the comments in 4.1.1,
Yeah, mine says it.
Actually in first line, but not in third line, or the second line.
Oh,
I just want to say, I still think my point is well taken. I think to say it makes it sound, and I think that the board's done this
with all due respect from the beginning, to say 2.5% of IME providers submitted 72%, but I think you can look at those numbers very differently to say that it was really 0.25% of doctors that did between 5,000 and 9,000 over 3 years. So I think it just is a little bit misleading. I don't know, I'm sure nobody would agree to having it changed, but I do think this makes it look like you could flip it to say the opposite way, which is most IME providers did between, 0 to 5,000 over 3 years. I mean,
Which is so
So,
true.
Mindy, we had one of our statisticians read your comments and
so I'm wrong?
yeah.
That's why I went to law school.
So that's why we didn't modify that.
All right, I
Would it-
stand corrected.
Would it help if we put the chart in?
Maybe.
We have it if you want it.
I'd like it in.
The chart, the chart's data.
Speaks for itself.
Yeah, and you can make all the conclusions you want.
Even my wrong conclusion, right?
Even your wrong conclusion was fine,
Especially.
in your mind.
So we had that chart multiple ways.
We modified it
We
towards
modified it to include costs, include timing.
You just keep a.
No, which was great.
This is volume and distribution, so
Okay.
yeah.
The initial.
The one in the original utilization study that we shared,
Okay.
right?
It's already supposed to be included as an
It
appendix
is.
too, right?
It is. Well, the whole schedule.
So we can
But the
drop
chart
it. We can
just
move
stuck
it.
right
That's
there
easy
will
enough.
speak for
Yeah.
itself,
Okay.
and we won't have to go through the whole
Yep.
state caps and the chart speaks.
And then, so Lev had a comment and Dr. Weinstein had a comment. How are you guys feeling now? Do you want to
So
share with the
first
committee what the nature of your comments were right there, or we're good with that?
We settled mine.
Settled Lev's, okay.
Yeah, I feel it's important because when we go to the end of the document, our conclusions are we reach consensus on one thing. So I don't want consensus does not mean unanimous. So I just wanted to define at the beginning how we just defined what we agreed upon and not agreed upon, how to be unanimous.
Does everyone agree? How does everyone feel about that?
Yeah, I thought I read it in here
It
somewhere.
says it where there was unanimous
Yeah, that's-
consensus.
Well, part 5 is going to become part 4, and you would add that in at that point, right?
Okay, yeah, we could add that to part 5, I guess. Let's see.
Right in the beginning.
It says there,
Dr.
too.
Weinstein, is that okay?
Unanimous
We'll
consensus.
be adding that to part 5.
Yeah,
It's in
that's
there.
fine. Okay.
Including the phrase predetermined. Because I don't think
It's a good
that
for that, yeah.
it didn't come to us as a mandate. We decided that that's the way we're gonna.
We could say it like that, the committee
The
decided.
committee decided.
Doesn't it say the committee resolved to make recommendations only where?
Yeah,
Yeah.
decided or resolved, yeah.
Predetermined was we as the committee predetermined it.
Yeah, I understand, but
Yeah. It's misleading to take it out.
The next comments were on 4.14.
Dr. Weinstein, that was your comment as well?
Hold on one second, let me just read it. Yeah, I think there was, for the most part, a consensus that everyone felt the physicians were the only providers allowed to do the IMEs.
that excludes chiropractors, and chiropractors are permitted to do IMEs.
A number of others are.
Also, psychologists.
Yeah, there's
Oh,
no,
no, sorry. I was looking at the providers.
yeah,
No, it's, yeah.
no consensus on that.
All right, so, yeah, so if that's incorrect, we can just take it out.
Okay. And then your second comment for 4.21.
Yeah, I just think that's kind of a summary statement that we all agree upon.
I didn't agree to that.
Sorry.
You don't want independent exams?
Yeah, no, I certainly don't want this quote.
I think we should include it.
I think it presumes there's bias to begin with. And I don't think that it's been proven to me that there's bias.
Wait a minute, you're saying there's not definite bias in IME exams?
I'm saying it hasn't been proven to me.
I actually agree with Lev. I don't think that, I think that's an unsubstantiated underlying premise that need not be stated here.
I agree.
But it's 100% true.
I think
It's not 100% true. I mean, in my world, we sometimes use the phrase that our IME threw us under the bus.
Yeah.
So it is not universally true that IMEs always favor carriers or employers.
No, I agree, 100%. But what I'm saying is there are definitely some biased IME providers.
Yeah.
So I know you've spoken about at least one on several occasions as we've met. I don't know who that is, so I haven't been able to read any of the reports. But if indeed there's one outlier,
Let's
There's
name
not
it.
one, no, there's one.
Well, this statement doesn't say that every IME is biased.
what's that?
This quote doesn't say that every one of them is biased, or that every one of them turns out biased results.
I don't think that that's the point. The point is, I don't think that that's...
Well, no, that was
really-
precisely Matt's point.
IME exams, by definition, are independent medical examinations. Is every doctor who does them actually giving an independent opinion? Absolutely not. Most, I think, do. I think most are good. In the same way I feel that most doctors are excellent doctors. There are some people doing IME exams who are not being unbiased. And for us to not say that's a fact is ridiculous.
How that enhances
Yeah, but
or
I don't think
detracts
that that's
from
the point of
the
this
section of
report.
actively treat.
Well, yeah, I guess
So
the
we can
question is, I
debate,
don't
we
know
can
who
debate
the-
this, but within the section of
Within the
actively treat,
section.
would it, I don't know if that, again, adds or detracts to it.
So where should we put it, Glenn?
I don't think it
I
should
don't
be
think
in
it
any
belongs
place.
here. I also don't, I mean, simply stated, I didn't agree to that statement or the concept behind it, so.
Okay, so it looks
Okay,
like there's no
there's no
consensus.
consensus.
Let's
Let
move
me see if I
on.
understand. So we don't agree that the IME exam should be unbiased?
I don't agree that we should start with a presumption, which is this is what it's doing, that IME exams are biased.
That's not what it's assuming. It's assuming that exams are not biased. And we should work to maintain that.
If we're assuming they're not biased, then it's totally unnecessary to write it. I'll assume they're unbiased. We don't need it in there.
What about saying there was agreement by all members of the committee that it's important to keep the reports truly independent? Then we're not using the word bias at all.
I don't think it's necessary, and I'm not going to agree to any change on this.
All right, let's move on.
So just to be clear, it's not important to you that they're
Like we're living in
independent?
It's important to me that they're independent. I don't think that it's necessary. It enhances the document, so I won't agree to put it in the document.
It's like we're living in Disneyland. This is reality. And as a practicing physician,
This doesn't feel like Disneyland.
No.
But he's a treating physician.
So what? What are you supposed to do?
He's not only a treating physician, he's a physician who, as far as I understand, performs a lot of these examinations.
I do. I perform a lot of IMEs. I'm a treating physician with a very busy orthopedic practice. And I see it from both sides. I try and be as independent as possible when I do my exams, but I also, when I'm treating patients, I have IME doctors who I know if I get a report from this doctor, he's going to deny everything because that's what he does. So to say that, oh, doctors are all unbiased is insane.
That's not what we're saying. We're also not saying they're all biased. We're just
I
not
agree.
saying.
I agree. Most doctors try to be unbiased. But I think as a committee, our goal is to say the objective is to maintain an independent medical examination.
So you'd be comfortable saying that most IME providers are unbiased, but the goal of the committee is to make sure that the very small percentage of those that may be biased aren't?
I think the goal of the committee is to try and have everyone be as unbiased as possible.
But the language that I just submitted to you wouldn't work?
No, it wouldn't work.
Okay. I just don't think we should put this in. We can move on.
Okay.
Well, I think we should put it in.
I agree with
on.
Steve's comment, but I think a good compromise would be to leave out the word bias.
All right, there was a suggestion of compromise. Would you go ahead again, Bill? Sorry.
Yeah, I was saying, I agree with Dr. Weinstein's comment, but maybe a good compromise would be to leave out the word bias, because the goal really is to make sure that these are truly independent exams.
I think that's fine. I just want to have some kind of statement from us as an important committee, saying the goal is to have fair exams. I don't know how to word it, so no one will be offended, but I think that is the goal of this committee.
Well, the language I gave before, that there was agreement by all members of the committee that it is important to keep the reports truly independent, does that.
No, I like the word fair. If you needed to put anything in, say fair.
is to review the relevant.
Fair and reasonable exams, but I don't think that anything should be in here. I don't think it's necessary and superfluous.
I think we're not gonna get people to agree with this.
No.
Why don't we trust this to the board
Oh, no, we're not
to
gonna-
come up with this sentence?
We're not gonna come up with
and yeah, absolutely. I think that we should.
But it doesn't belong here.
Joe,
It
you
doesn't belong
suggested
here.
If we can't, I'll make a recommendation,
Yeah, you
but any recommendation that I make will be disqualified because it's coming from me. So my recommendation now is that the board come up with a sentence to fit this need, and we can go back and forth, by email or however, preferably not as a group, to see if we can get somewhere on it. Does that sound reasonable? If we can't, we can't. But I think that it's important to at least explore.
How about we
Not to be
say,
snarky, but to fill what need, Joe?
We've heard several board members of this committee express their position that it's important to them that the committee as a whole voice some type of support for independent examinations. Right? I don't necessarily need the word bias to be in there. Of course, I would like it to be in there. If you read through my comments, I tried to put it in a bunch of different places because I think it exists.
I think the draft, paragraph 2, under advisory committee, covers everything that we're talking about.
What page?
It's
Three. Page three, right?
page 1, in quotes. Ensuring fairness and eliminating bias, are synonymous. So I think it's already covered.
Yeah, because that was our charge. Let's keep it at
It's
that.
covered.
I'm lost too.
There's two things in quotes here.
Oh, the second
Sure,
paragraph.
and then
Yeah, paragraph 2.
Yeah, that's good.
Are we
I think
good?
that's responsive to Dr. Weinstein's concern because it gets at the heart of our charge right there. Okay, so if we can agree, we'll just keep it at that.
I agree.
You all right?
I'm good.
Okay, where were we?
So,
I think
we
we're
are on to
good.
page 12, and that is continuing education and same day, same manner, which we just discussed today, and we'll, update these sections to reflect today's discussion. Are there any other comments on that, or you wait for?
Yeah, we should.
Okay. So the next would be on page 13. Okay, the modified request for information filing, we did not come to agreement on that.
So Joe's suggesting 9 out of 10 as opposed to 8%. Does anyone feel strongly? Statistically, would it be okay to say that? Did we check with our statistician?
Well, I mean, we use
Don't say it anywhere else.
percent numbers throughout the rest of it, so I don't know why we.
88% is more precise.
That's fine by me.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Page 16, next time. Oh, no, there's one comment there, so. Page 17. So you can take that out because there was no consensus on any language.
On annual reporting.
Annual report.
Yes.
Now I'm lost.
We
Or
are
no, I'm
now-
sorry, I was referring to fraud prevention. Yeah,
So can I just clarify, so 4.5.1, the board does not have standardized annual reporting requirements, although the chair always has the right to, are we taking that out or leaving that in?
no, that was my mistake. I was referring to the fraud stuff, so. that was-
Okay,
So you can ignore what I just did.
I'm not
So are we
sure
back
why
on
it's
16
highlighted, but I,
I'm not sure either, I just want to clarify that everyone's okay with leaving it as
We're
drafted.
on 4.5.1, the highlighted section, and they're trying to figure out why they highlighted this section. And maybe it was to see if we needed additional discussion on the words that are in that.
I just want to confirm that people are okay leaving that as is.
yes, that's okay with me.
Yeah, because it essentially says we talked about these things, we did not reach consensus.
Okay.
For this one, do we have to say we didn't read consensus because it's stating what is?
Well, if you look below to the next one, you know, throughout all of these, to the extent we had a discussion on them, and consensus is not reached, we've noted that.
Yeah, but if you take it out from this one, it's just talking about what is. I don't think you need it in the first, but that's my opinion.
It's saying that we discussed changing the requirements, including certain areas, and at the end, no consensus was made.
so the next one is fraud prevention.
Is it the-
And that was the language,
That's what I was
Yeah, the
referring to, that we
13D.
discussed it, there was no consensus.
right, so we'll update this.
Okay.
Okay. And then, as we mentioned, we'll move part 5, we'll flip-flop part 5 and part 4. And in addition to the mandatory training, we'll add, we'll put a placeholder there for same day, same manner, incorporating what the guidelines would look like, as well as a change in the hours, or the scheduling of IMEs.
Is there any other issues on the draft report that people want to see us address, readdress, clarify?
Okay, so then, as we mentioned, we'll make modifications to the report and get you the additional language. We'll have this all out to you by November 20th. We're looking for your comments on that draft to be sent back to us by December 2nd. And then we will meet again if needed on the 12th.
Yeah, I mean, if we find that there's only minor edits coming back on the December 2nd, we can flip the revised version back out and ask if people are okay with publishing it as drafted, the cleaned up version. And if we have unanimous consent, then we will cancel the 12th, meeting on the 12th. Does that work, people?
Yes. Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's your incentive.
To turn the report around.
Yeah.
Consensus.
Agree.
All right, thank you, everyone.